Hello, family. What is good out there with you guys? Marcus Hart here, your war vet turned shameless Jesus preacher, hosting the Transform You live show. That's Transform the Letter U live show. Today, we're going to be unpacking Night Film, a film that got folks searching. What is it about? Picture the dude driving solo in Canada, pre down dark, when headlights creep up, 20 minutes of vigilante chase vibes. 7 years later, he's back, facing his soul scars. It's raw, it's race, it's survival. And it's straight from the South by Southwest champ himself, Khary Jones, Khary Saeed Jones. Thank you so much. I tripped up on that. So I just want to let people know before we roll that like this ain't your typical film podcast. I want you guys to thank Faith Meets Streets. I want to know today why it matters and how it will refill your depleted self. So stick with me. We got Khary here. How's it going, sir?
Doing very well. Thanks for having me.
Well, yeah, the man himself is here, award-winning director and editor behind Night Fight, South by Southwest, ate it up, and it's blowing people's minds. Kari, your film's a trip. As I was kind of telling you that, like, I was kind of intrigued by it. It's a 20-minute chase that turns into a haunting reckoning. So what's Night Fight about at its core, actually?
Yeah, it's what's a story about racial violence, racial intimidation. It's a story that it's fundamentally personal.
Mhm.
It's kind of it's a film that I had to kind of get out, and it's I mean I could say that it's a lot of things. It's also me sort of like sharing my story with friends and family that didn't know. I mean, for for a number of years, I was I initially told friends and my immediate family about the encounter, but I was kind of left to myself, and kind of taken to myself to kind of create these self portraits that really were, I think, kind of working through
Yeah.
some of the things that some of the raw feelings that I was um, experiencing for the first time.
So I hear what you're saying, and I think that really can resonate with a lot of people. But deep diving into that, especially hanging off like, the last part of what you said,
Hmm.
for you, did it like spark from like, just the personal grit of getting through that, or was it
Yeah.
more so to like present magic in the cinema?
Well, it's look. I'm a filmmaker. I'm a storyteller. It's like that's through and through. That's who I am. But I'm first and foremost, I'm a human being, and
Right.
I think that when there are a lot of people who've been followed. There are a lot of people who have experienced things far more intense than obviously than what I went through. And in the film, I share the stories of friends and colleagues
Yeah.
who have kind of experienced a range of sort of experiences that have attempted to kind of like cut them down in certain ways and that they've had to sort of overcome. I think that you know I you know I wanted to sort of make sense of what had happened, right?
Yeah.
When this type of thing happened, and you don't, there's no words exchanged. I just have this sort of memory of these dead cold eyes of this guy who's kind of that I'm looking at in the rear view mirror, and he's
Right.
expressionless. And why did this happen? Why did you choose me to do this? Why did you try to take time out of your day just to sort of like to launch into this episode. And when you don't have when you don't have answers to those questions, and you're a curious person, it's going to it's going to push you to do something, right? It's going to
Right.
push you to create something, even if that's creating conversation. If you're a writer, you may write poetry. You may, if you're a podcast host, you may make it the subject of a series of conversations that you have with folks.
Yeah.
Exploring that idea, that emotion. But I know I had to do something, and I don't know that, and I don't know that I have answers ultimately about like why this particular human being decided to follow me. But I do know, what I do know what happened. I do understand what happened to me, and I'd also know sort of like how to how to communicate that,
Right.
and I feel like I've made something that was um, not just self-reflective, but was sort of like kind of ultimately kind of like community centered.
I love that. And that is absolutely as real as it's going to get. You know, Night Fight feels like, to me, the remix of the 23 number song, Dark Valleys, as you was, telling a little bit of the overview of, like, your experience, dark valleys, still waters,
Hmm.
um some would wonder, was Jesus riding the shotgun on that one, or was it all you? It's a big deal, man, and folks want to
Yeah.
know, who you are behind the lens, and how faith is fitting in this.
Well, so I mean, I think one thing to say is that I grew up in a Christian home. But I grew up, and I grew up sort of going to United Methodist Church. I for school, from K to 8, I went to kind of there are a number of them in the Northeast, and particularly in the Philadelphia area where I grew up. But there are a number. I grew up in Quaker schools, and so part of my practice, as a student in those schools, was to every morning, for a short time, and then once a week for an hour, to just to sit and to be with yourself, right, and to find the spirit, and to find influence, and to find and to navigate, the find the spirit, and I think also to kind of to fight, fight the influence of forces that might prey upon on your energy, on your goodwill. And so that's something that I think by the time that I got to making this film, but certainly by the time I experienced what I experienced in Canada, when this guy followed me, those are kind of experiences that I had sort of like, and kind of a training and a kind of a habit of being that I had. I won't say I left behind, but it just wasn't part of my day to day any longer. But it was something that I think for sure, as I was encountering, as I was living through this experience, like that, I won't say that I don't think I had any presence of mind in the moment, but I think I did have this habit of being comfortable, in quiet, being comfortable in the stillness. And what I explore in the film, is sort of like, really like the forces, that within us, the forces of influence that can kind
Hmm.
of prey on our spirit, and prey on our energy, prey on our ability to sort of like to be enlarged by
Yeah.
by life, and by the unseen, the forces that might sort of like to make us retreat to our smaller selves, as Toni Morrison might say. James Baldwin, Morrison talks about sort of like the things that make us smaller, right? And kind
Hmm.
of working against that. And, Baldwin talks about, the ability of faith to sort of enlarge in us, to make us the
Right.
fullest, the boldest, the biggest parts of ourselves, and the most generous parts of ourselves, and I think that, in the film, I profile in some ways the versions of myself that were born on that day. And some of those versions are checked out, are kind of are have become sort of like, squashed in some way
Yeah.
by this encounter. There's a version of me in the film that is so rageful that, he's kind of actively like looking for this person who did this thing to me.
Right.
And then there's me. There's the Khary Jones who's living in real time, trying to make
Yeah.
sense of all this, and trying to decide how I can be a not not pass on this experience, the rawness of this
Hmm.
experience, to my family, to my sons, frankly, how I can
Yeah.
continue to be, their father, and be the same father that they've known, in spite of this experience, while also
Yeah.
sort of, giving them, some sense of the dangers that are out there in the world. So I don't know, I think I've kind of meandered around your
No,
answer there,
yeah.
but I think that I wasn't there alone.
Yes.
I wasn't there alone.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And You describe yourself as always like, like as you was, talking, I heard you say like chasing after the spirit, looking for the spirit, there's this longing within all of us, to get truth and
Mm.
find truth. And when something like that happens to you, as you describe, there is almost like this outer body experience, and then you're able to see these different personas, these different hats that you wear, the different core of your soul that really speaks to who you try to project to be in the world, and some of the dark areas where you just hey man, if I can put that in a cage and keep that in a cage and lock it up, I ain't gonna have to worry about it. But in situations like that, there's multiple things happening all at once, and to come out of that and say, you know what, it's not so much about why, but more so, how do I process this? How do I
Hmm.
process this? How do I deliver this and give this over to someone else? And God is the best co-star. He is the best co-star that we have. And so why should our audience care? The urban hustlers, the church dropouts, the people who are depleted, chased by demons, like the guy who was coming after you. Night Flights hits home when it talks about survival and race.
I mean, I think that all of us, I got into this a little bit a moment ago, but all of us have these have a darkness that can fall upon us, right? There are these dark corners that we can retreat into, and I don't think I don't think we should be afraid of the darkness. We
Yeah.
need to confront it ultimately, and that's why, because you if you never look, you don't know what's there. If you don't look, you don't know what's there. And I see this. This is some part of what I, just speaking as a father now. You see you see things in your children, and you don't you want to like you don't want to like there may be an instinct to kind of like to push it down, right?
Hmm.
To say, oh, or to overlook it, to ignore it. And part of the father as a mentor, it's like you're trying to be aware of the parts of your child, of yourself that are vulnerable, right?
Yes.
That are hungry for something,
Mhm.
that are and hunger can take lots of different. There can be there's a physical hunger, but then there's a kind of a hunger for the limelight, to have the
Yeah.
spotlight on us. There's a can be a hunger um, to for revenge, right?
Mhm.
There can be um, these feelings of that we are not entirely in control of, and
Yeah.
they do many times live in the shadows.
Yes.
And I think that there's that the metaphor of sunlight, which I always find very helpful for um, you know making sense of my own ability to sort of like to find sources of light, and to not just think of like the sunlight as like the source of like as what the sun brings, but
Yeah.
I think that your path to faith and church, I think our paths into community, our paths into finding spiritual mentors, to finding mentors in our walks of life, to finding partners,
Yeah.
that are nourishing, and that kind of see us, and that see all of it, willing to see all of us. That these are all kind of sources of light. That metaphor, I think, lends um, you know that metaphor is in conversation with.
Excellent. Excellent. You brought something out of me as you were talking, and it is nothing better than being a father. And I think, you get blessed to become a father because you have experienced some things that, you want to teach your kids, not, hey, don't run into this, don't do this. I already did it for you. Situations like this, when we want to almost be a helicopter parent, like, hey, I see you going in that direction. I got daughters and I got sons, and man, it's tough. And you do become like a spiritual mentor. You yourself may still be seeking a spiritual mentor, but you're already kind of in that role as a father. You know, you, and even when you're with a partner, you have to be that role. in some respects, and the protector, and then of course the provider.
There you go.
So yeah, it's that's a good correlation, and I think anyone has the opportunity to be not only father but a parent, but fathers definitely, and I think we feel it a little bit more um, when it comes to protection and the importance of stress and survival to our kids, and um, trying to guide them the way, and help them confront the things that are in the dark, as you mentioned. There's things we have to confront. We can't shy away from it. Fear should absolutely be a motivator. So I, I'm gonna have our audience stick around. We gonna dive deeper into this and get into more
Sure.
on Night Fight and learn more about Khary, who's incredible. He's a blessing to be here. Like I said, he's helping me realize some things too. So we'll be right back. Don't go away.
Thank you.
One. Okay, everyone. We are here with Khary Saeed Jones, and I got the name right. My good friend and big brother out of Massachusetts. Yeah, we've been talking, on some about some things that really hit home, and I know you guys will care about this a lot more and value, what this film can do for you. So speaking of the film, Khary, what's one scene that screams that this is for y'all, and why would you know that once they experience it, that it will stick?
Well, I mean, I think that there's, I don't, not the, I would, I don't want to spoil it, but, I think that, I think one of the things that, may not be entirely clear, from as you're watching the first, like I say, third of the film is how much of a family story it becomes in the end. And, you do hear my son's voice throughout, and there's a kind of an unfolding conversation that's happening between us. There is, there's my attempt, to kind of make sense, to attempt to kind of make sense of what I experience, to kind of share what I experience. So some of it with my son, and, the implications of that obviously are that there's there's the talk that Black parents are, so often, put in a position of giving to their children, which is this, you know, this kind of a roadmap, this emotional, but almost kind of behavioral kind of roadmap for like how you should, navigate the world
Right.
that now that as an adolescent, as a young adult, as an adult, you're going to be encountering. And, I think, you know, where the film goes, I think, I didn't know that this is where the film was going, until I was fairly far down the road of making it. But it became clear that at some point that I was going to need to, you know, in order to have this conversation with my son and not for it to just be this act of kind of re-traumatizing him or kind of giving him raw an experience that he had not experienced, right?
Right.
But that to kind of fill his imagination with just sort of the pain, but that there was an opportunity here, and maybe I was going to be obligated to sort of include him in the making of this, in
Mm.
how to kind of stitch together these different versions of myself into a
Right.
version that was forward looking, right? That wasn't just looking backward, that wasn't just kind of confused, not a version of myself that sort of that was 100% certain that I had a grasp of everything, but a version of myself that um, was with him and with my family, trying to move forward, with into uncertainty, knowing that we're not promised, we don't know what's going to happen, next hour, next year, next month, right, next
Yeah.
year. We're not promised that kind of certainty as human beings. But if we kind of accept that mantle of, um, of of our humanity and of the gift that is, then that's there's a lot there to sort of to make a life with, to make joy out of, and to make a part of your family.
Exactly. And it is that forward thinking, that's very similar to the Hebrews of ancient times, typically, and also just historically too, that they use the stories that that their previous ancestors have experienced, and even themselves in whatever time they're in, to share those stories, to not look back, but to move forward and move the entire, family and culture towards God, but and also, to advance the family, advance the culture and traditions, so that like there are learned things that come out of them. There's established values, there are established rules, and different different ways of surviving, through, whatever they have experienced before. And that's very interesting that you brought that up. And, you know, and I keep going back to like just, being a father, like, and how, especially a black father, black American father, it's, I would say that is totally different. And one time or another, our sons are going to go through, something similar to what you went through, if not the same. I myself has at least, had a similar situation like that happen to me one or two times that I can remember. And it's just, how do you prepare them for that? Well, the best way to prepare them for that is, just to share, the different emotions that you felt, and all the things that you went through, and how you learned how to process it afterwards. And, it's just a shame after, even after these years, that we still got to have that talk. And, And now we're seeing, like, it's an entire attack on the male species itself, so like it's just not like, us anymore. It's an entire attack on the male species, and it's quite different, but that should tie us all together. So where can folks watch Night Flight? South by Southwest done what they needed to do, and what the streets needed, and as an editor, did you ever cut something wild and think, dang, I'm a savage? So where can we watch it, and what's going to keep us glued?
Well, so I got some bad news. Got some good news and some bad news. The bad news is that, that Marcus, you've seen it. The good news is that you've seen it, and that we are committed. The team is committed to sort of bringing it to, spaces, places far and wide in this country and abroad. North, south, east, west. I want audiences to see this film. I want to have conversations with audience. I mean, but it's something like when you're a filmmaker, and you make something. There's something I tell my students all the time. Like there's nothing like having something that begins in your head, right? This just speaking about the creative process, that begins in your head, and then after months, years of labor, right? Can be projected on the screen, right? And then better even more than projected, discussed, and where this conversation that in this work that you've been doing in private, oftentimes it can be part of like a Q&A, a conversation. So that's something that when I was down in South by Southwest with many of the people who you saw in the film, in fact, it was meant a lot to me and to us as a group to be able to share the film with audiences and have a conversation with them. So that's something I'm looking forward to. Yeah. That's the good news is that folk are beginning to see it, that you've seen it, spreading the word about the film and what it has to share, what it has to give. Bad news is that you may have to wait a little while, until the film makes it to your city. Yeah. And maybe a little bit longer until it's on your, any of these streaming platforms. So, but it will be there.
It's worth the wait.
And I hope it's worth the wait. I know it's worth the wait. And
I don't want to spoil it. Yeah. Yeah. So, and you do have incredible actors, by the way, too. Shout out to all your actors, like, incredible actors, like, for you to like put together a cast like that. That's amazing. I always find that, very amazing. I'm a little envious sometimes of, like, editors and directors. Like, you guys got a tough job, but you make it seem so easy.
No, it's tough. It'll drive you. It'll drive you to the wall. Many times. It's not easy, but look, this is storytelling, filmmaking. It's sort of this core to my being. I don't think I'll ever not be making, something. I don't get caught up in like genre or the kind of film.
That's good.
But there are many stories to tell. There are many souls to explore.
I'm glad you see it that way. That's good. To be multidimensional in your thinking. So, if people want to connect with you, Khary, how can we connect with you, to track the journey of this film and other things you're going to be having coming out?
So the easiest way to kind of find out more about the film, to find out a little bit about me and about the process of making the film, is to go to nightfightfilm.com, nightfightfilm.com, where you can go to my own personal website, KharyJones.com. That's KHARY Jones.com.
Excellent, excellent. So thank you so much, for joining us today and just giving us so much value and things that just leave us walking away here thinking about and keep us thinking about the movie too. So at the same time, so it's good to match a face with who's behind these type of films and these stories, these incredible stories. So, those who out there, I want you to give it up for Khary Saeed Jones. Night Fight's a soul shaker for sure. Race, survival, faith, and all the visuals in that hit like a sermon. So once again, big thanks to you, big brother. Keep dropping the truth. Family, this ain't some dry film pod. Marcus Hart here, bringing Jesus to the streets and 3,000 downloads deep. If you want to know why it's different, we're raw, real, refilling depleted souls. Get your story told. Hit us up at marcus-hart.com/newsroom-blogs and drop Night Fight in the comments if you haven't already. Share this and stay seamless, stay refilled. Let's go viral. Many blessings, peace, and lots of love. We're out.
I stand for what you stand for. I'm at your door like the landlord. I can see the future, yeah, I fast forward. I get on the mic and I transform. Follow me, I'm in rare form. Follow me on this world tour. The asteroid that you can't avoid.